this. My name is Natalie Loney. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator with EPA, and I'm assigned to the Columbia site. Margaret Greger. Margaret is the on-scene coordinator, which is another way of saying the technical person assigned to the site. So Margaret and I are going to be doing a presentation on the status of the actions that EPA and New York City Parks are taking with regard to the lead contamination at redhook Park. So the presentation is going to be broken into two parts. First, EPA will be talking, and then we'll open up the floor briefly for questions about order, which is the legal document that New York City Parks and EPA have enjoined to do the work. So we'll be taking questions specifically about that. Then we'll turn the floor over to New York City Parks. They'll explain to you what the removal and restoration of the park will look like. At the end of all of that, we'll have a question and answer on all that's been covered. All right? So I'm going to turn the floor over to Margaret Greger, and then it will be New York City Parks. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, by the way, I just wanted to make note of the fact that representatives from New York City Department of Health are also here, as I think is scheduled to be here as well. They'll introduce themselves in their portion of the evening. All right, thank you so much.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate the nice attendance you have. If this goes out, just raise your hand okay, I'll try to yell. So I'm kind of like the overall project manager and coordinator for the site. So I just wanted to first touch on our key messages for the presentation. So New York City Parks will be conducting removal action, which is our term for short-term Superfund cleanup at redhook ballfields 5 through 8 and redhook ballfield 9. It's going to be under formal EPA oversight with a consent order that I'll explain during the presentation. The consent order sets the time frame for the cleanup of the fields. It's going to take several years to finish the project because it's very large and complex. And it's got to meet very stringent standards. Thank you. If you can't hear me, let me know. So we're looking at starting construction at ballfields 5 through 8 in summer of next year. The fields will be completely redone by fall 2018. This is just ballfields 5 through 8. After that, we'll start the construction of ballfield 9, and that will go until spring 2020. So right now, we've got the design work for ballfields 5 through 9 well underway, and we're actually running ahead of the schedule that was set in the consent order. This is a huge engineering project, which is why it takes so long, and the design that Parks has come up with looks really good so far, we think. And it takes a lot of community concerns into account, so we'll go with that. So Parks and Health and EPA will keep providing you with updates on ballfields 5 through 9 as the cleanup progresses, especially at important milestones like when we set the construction schedule. The work for all of the other fields aside from ballfields 5 through 9 is being done separately by New York City Parks. It's not under the consent order, but it's going to follow the same set of standards, and we'll be kind of in a consulting role as needed for that. So in this presentation, I'm just going to briefly recap the site history and background and EPA's sampling investigation, although many of you are familiar faces by now, which is great. I'll talk about the ballfields 5 through 9 cleanup plans and what's involved in the consent order, and then go over the cleanup scope and time frame for ballfields 5 through 9. And then Parks is going to get more into detail about the specific plans for ballfields 5 through 8. So this all started back in the late 1920s when the Columbia Smelting and Refining Works facility set up shop on the corner of Hicks Street and Lorraine Street, which is now Ballfield 7 of Red Hook Park. It was a smelting plant, which meant that it would melt down all different kinds of scrap metals like batteries and pipes and cables containing lead, and they would add chemicals and form it into a metal of higher purity with lead, or a mixture of a specialized mixture of metals called an alloy. So this down here is a picture of a typical secondary smelter. It's got a big smokestack up top. This smelting process creates these big clouds of lead dust and fumes, and they exit the stack and then they get carried by wind currents. But because lead is so heavy, it doesn't travel very far and it kind of drops out into the surrounding ground. So that's how it gets into the soil. And then when the facility is demolished, sometimes the waste that's inside the facility can get mixed in with the soil as well. So once the lead is in the soil, it doesn't degrade easily, it doesn't really leach out, it just kind of stays put because it's very stable. And then people get exposed to it by incidentally ingesting it when they put dirty hands in their mouths, or they touch lead contaminated soil and touch their face, or when kids put toys in their mouth or other dirty objects. And unfortunately, children, especially under the age of 6, are most susceptible to the health effects of lead, which are mostly neurological symptoms. And New York City Health is here to answer any questions on the health effects. EPA first got involved in the site in 2014 when the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation referred this Columbia site to us, along with a suite of other potential smelter sites from all different parts of New York State. So we started our investigation in 2014. We ended up doing 3 separate sampling events, all following the same protocols. But we sampled most of Red Hook Park and some of Red Hook houses, focused on the smelter footprint and the areas downwind of it that would have been most likely to be impacted. So we sampled all through ballfields 5 through 8, ballfield 9, soccer fields 2, 1, and 6. And it ended up being 88 locations, and it was about 460 samples, so it was a pretty thorough investigation, because at each location we sampled 5 different depths of soil within the top 2 feet. And then when we were done with this, parks also sampled the remaining areas of Red Hook Park. So the whole park has been sampled. So this is what the sampling process looks like. We take it's called a hand auger. It's a contraption like this, dig it into the ground, into the top 2 feet. And we sample depths at 0 to 1 inch, 1 to 6 inches below the surface, 6 to 12 inches below the surface, and then 12 to 18 inches, 18 to 24 inches. We jar up each of these sampling intervals in these little jars, and then we sent them to the lab for analysis for heavy metals. So we found that the highest lead levels were located in ballfields 5 through 8. As soon as we got the results, we told parks about it. They agreed with us that we should close the parks until the cleanup can be completed. So instead of opening the parks as they were scheduled to in spring 2015, they kept them closed. They put up signage and fencing to let people know that they were closed. And we analyzed all of the results, all the different metal concentrations within all of the samples. And by looking at the ratios of certain metals characteristic of lead smelters, we can tell which samples are most likely to be related to the smelter and which ones are not. So using that analysis, we figured out that ballfields 5 through 8 and ballfield 9 have been impacted by this historic Columbia smelter, and the rest of the park had lower levels of contamination that was related to historic fill. So it wasn't an immediate cause for concern at ballfields 1, 2, and 6. We had a lot lower contaminant results, and it was at the deeper levels. So we recommended a long-term cleanup of these fields rather than a short-term action, and Parks is going to be doing just that. So because the contamination at ballfields 5 through 9 was related to the Columbia smelter, we made the determination that a removal action or a short-term cleanup had to be conducted under EPA oversight, and Parks stepped up and decided they could do this work and that they would have us oversee it. And actually, if you could just go back a slide. So these are some of our lead results that we found in parts per million. So you can see they were much higher at ballfields 5 through 8 than they were at all of the other fields. And this is showing you from the surface down to 2 feet deep at each of the respective fields.
So just a clarification, maybe this is for Parks. I mean, you listed as field 1. Is that, but there are also 4 baseball fields?
Yeah, those are on the other side of the park.
So that's not it?
So
That's not it's a rectangle.
Okay, so fields 1 through 4 are not on
They're not shown.
yeah, 1 through 4 are like over here. So Parks,
I'll address those in this meeting.
yeah, this is kind of talking about EPA sampling results. Okay. So the oversight process happens under a consent order between EPA and Parks. So EPA gives Parks this consent order for the removal action, which is a short-term cleanup. It's a formal legal document. It's called an administrative settlement agreement and order on consent for removal action, which is a mouthful, but we usually call it a consent order on consent, just the plain old order, something like that. So this is available for public review. It's going to be at our information repository, which is the Red Hook Library. So we worked on this with Parks, EPA's and Parks' legal teams and technical staff. And so we started it last August. We had it signed a couple weeks ago. And to avoid tying up the work until it was actually signed, Parks started doing some of the work required by the order last fall to get a jump on things. So this consent order sets the whole scope of the action and requires all of the plans that will be necessary to complete the removal action. And they'll be submitted by New York City Parks as contractor through Parks to EPA. It includes a lot of required timeframes and penalties if certain timeframes aren't met. So this, I just kind of listed out the meat of the order. This is what EPA is requiring of Parks as part of this removal action. So first there are 3 interim measures, things that we need to know that they're doing now, which is keep ballfields 5 through 8 closed to eliminate exposure to those fields until the removal action is done. Provide and maintain signage for the fields to let people know the fields are closed, and then maintain the fields so that there's not any more exposures while we're waiting for the removal action to be completed. Then there's the removal work, which consists of providing 12 inches of clean soil or other EPA-approved material with a barrier beneath that to block people from touching any of the contamination. So it eliminates exposure to the contaminants that are going to be left there. And then we said restore the park to similar usage. We also require that Parks participates with EPA in all public communications, and that they establish long-term maintenance protocols from the site, which we call post-removal site controls, which will prevent exposure for the next however long, hundreds of years. So how do we achieve this scope? This is actually a pretty tall order. So we break it down into a number of steps. Because it's a significant engineering effort, it's almost an 8-acre area. The whole project is going to cost $28.5 million. So we're phasing the project, as I mentioned, to ballfields 5 through 8 and then ballfield 9. The order specifies that a series of plans be submitted to EPA, including several that comprise the work plan, which is a project management plan saying who's who, an interim design plan saying what they're doing now and what their overall plan is going to be for the cleanup, and what the schedule is. And then the biggest plan is the design and implementation plan, which takes a lot into consideration, including all the construction specs, the whole design with all the drawings, how they're going to assure that the construction is done according to certain standards, the schedule, the equipment and material staging plan, all the engineering drawings, the schedule for permitting requirements, how they'll manage decontamination of materials, how they manage site security and to avoid vandalism and things like that, and traffic control procedures, community monitoring, like air monitoring during the cleanup, and then what they'll do for the waste transport and disposal from the site. So there's a lot to consider. And then there's the construction plan, which basically is the final plan for the logistics of construction. And along with these, there's going to be health and safety plans, quality assurance plans, and that long-term maintenance plan. And they'll be submitting monthly progress reports to us, as well as some final reports. So overall, the time frame, again, is going to be fall 2018 completion for ballfields 5 through 8, spring 2020 completion for ballfield 9. They're also going to wrap in soccer field 2 when they clean up ballfield 9, just based on the proximity. So Parks is required to stick to the schedule or else they'll be penalized up to $6,000 per day. And they're required to resubmit any plans within 2 weeks, and EPA is going to keep this as one of our high priority sites to just keep the project moving. And then again, the long-term controls, those are going to be overseen not by EPA, but by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, although EPA will be reviewing everything. So these long-term controls basically tell us what the allowable uses of the site will be. It'll set the schedule for inspections and monitoring of the site, and it'll talk about the conduct of future activities like utility work to ensure that nobody is exposed to contaminants that are left in place. And this is all documented in, it's basically an easement that gets submitted to the New York City clerk or register. So we've heard a lot of concerns about why is this time frame so long, and we understand that it's not fun to have the fields closed for this long, but we want everyone to understand how many steps are involved in this process. So as I mentioned, the design work is ongoing. It's going to be completed by this fall. First, Parks had to get a contractor on board for the design. So they had to get requests for proposals, submit a work order to the New York City Office of Management and Budget, and then they had to get the contractor approved by EPA. That's all done. They had to do a geotechnical investigation to see what kind of conditions are at the site, and therefore what kind of design could be done to look into like the stormwater management and the green infrastructure possibilities. After that, they do the detailed engineering drawings for every single facet of the site and the cleanup. They look at the site layout, the stormwater management, and the equipment and material staging plan. And then they've got those other plans, as I mentioned, for site security, traffic control, community monitoring, and transport and disposal. All of these plans have to be approved by New York City Parks' internal design team, the community board, the Public Design Commission, and EPA. And these are all basic requirements of any project of this scale in the city. So once all the design work is done, getting a construction contractor on board is going to take about 9 months. So they write up the construction contracts, it's got to be reviewed within parks and then reviewed within New York City Law Department and other New York City agencies. Then the contract goes out for bid, it gets awarded, and then it's got to be registered with the New York City Comptroller. After that's all done, we're almost there. On-site construction is going to take between 12 and 18 months. Again, starting summer 2017 for ballfields 5 through 8, and being completed next fall, or the fall 2018, I'm sorry. So that's a big process too, because we will have to have all of the existing park features removed, almost everything that's on the site, and then the whole site gets graded, and then all of the park features needs to be reinstalled, including the trees, the curbs, the fencing, the benches, the utilities, the fountains, portions of the sidewalk, the lighting, the turf, ramps, stairs, everything. So this kind of lists it out step by step. This is actually my tracking spreadsheet that I use, a simplified version of it. So in red here you see all the plans that are due to EPA. These are the due dates we have set in the order, and these are all the other steps that Parks needs to go through. So they've given us draft timeframes for all these steps, and as you can see here, they're well underway for getting all of the design approvals. They're actually ahead of schedule. The step we're on right now is the interim design plan. This was due according to the order this October, and they've already submitted it to us. We provided comments, and we should be getting that finalized within the next couple weeks. So just to briefly touch on the approach for the removal action, we'll be having synthetic turf at the surface with a drainage layer underneath, and then clean fill. Then we'll have a demarcation layer that's basically an orange snow fence, something permeable and highly visible. And below that is going to be the existing soil. So this capping approach to the site has a lot of benefits, including raising the elevation of the entire park. It's a very good protective remedy for it, and it takes a lot less time than some of the other approaches that could be taken. So it is going to require removal of a lot of the trees on site, because tree roots can't really tolerate more than a few inches of soil placed on top. Even if it looks fine for a little while, the tree will inevitably die within a couple years. So that's why many of the trees have to be removed and replaced. So they've got a pretty extensive plan for the trees, which has been conceptually approved by EPA and the New York State DEC. So Parks ran the design plan by the community several times starting last November, and they've taken a lot of community concerns into consideration. We think the design looks pretty good so far. They'll be putting in synthetic turf fields. They're raising the elevation of the fields. They've carefully considered the stormwater plans and have included a bioswale, which is a really good green feature. They're putting in more bike racks, a storage shed. They've made it all handicap accessible, and they've put more perimeter lighting around the site for security. So these were all elements that were added in response to people's concerns that were brought during the meetings. And they've got a good contractor on board that has a lot of experience with landscape architecture, green infrastructure, and we looked at the experience of pretty much everyone involved in this project, and it looks like it's in good hands. So Parks is going to go over the details of their plans after this. So I'm going to have Natalie do the community involvement slide here. So thank you.
Part of the work that whenever EPA gets involved in this kind of work of cleaning up a contaminated site, the community involvement component is very important to us. And we have been, we've hosted public meetings, and we've actually developed a document called a community involvement plan. And what that plan does, it captures what the concerns of the community are, and it also gives a response in terms of what kind of actions EPA plans on taking as a result of that. So EPA, we wrote a community involvement plan based on interviews that we conducted with community members, based on opinions that we gleaned from public meetings, based on conversations that we've had with elected officials and people in the community. That document is in a draft form, and it is available on our webpage. It's about 20-something pages long. It sounds like it's a lot, but it's actually, I have just a couple of copies. We're kind of required to keep our printing costs down. EPA can't come with a lot of paper. I guess you understand why. But anyway, I have just 2 copies with me tonight, but it is available online. And if you look at the fact sheet that's available at the door, it has the EPA web page on it, and a copy of this document is there, plus the PowerPoint presentation you saw this evening, plus the fact sheet that we created. This is fact sheet number 5, but 1 through 4 is available on that web page as well. And we have them both in English and in Spanish. We didn't get to translate fact sheet number 5 yet, porque mi español no es muy bien. So forgive me, but we should have it online within the next couple of weeks or so. Anyway, so what I'm asking you all to do is to take a look at this document. I think it's great because I wrote it. But take a look at it, and it reads relatively easily. It kind of gives a history of the site and a history of what EPA has done. And it also includes the issues of environmental justice, the issues that were raised by the community. So I would ask that you take a look at it, and if there's something that you think we need to include in it, or something you think that we didn't capture very well, please email me. I'm giving you all 30 days or so. I know it's kind of a short time frame, and it is August. So if you get it to me after September 5th, I'll include it as well. So if you can, take a look at the document and let me know what you think. My email address is here, and it's on our webpage. Right? I have 2 copies, so first come, first serve. Come on down. Anyway, in addition, Margaret made mention of the fact that we have something called an information repository. And what that is all of the information that we've generated over the course of the lifetime of the project is available for review at the library. We recognize not everyone has access to the internet, not everybody has access to a computer, so we want to make sure you don't have access to a computer? That'll be, we're going to put that up. Yeah, we'll put all of the site-related documents. So it is available. Hard copies are available at the Red Hook Library, and everything else is also available online. In addition, there are New York City Parks websites that has their information available as well. The other thing I'd like to ask all of you to do is on the EPA webpage, the URL is on the fact sheet. There is a section that I'm requesting that anyone who wants to be added to our email list, if you haven't signed in tonight, or if you want to pass this information on to your colleagues, to your neighbors, to your friends, please email me their contact information. That way, every time there's an update, every time there's a public meeting, every time there's something going on with the site, it's very easy for me to send out an email to folk rather than snail mail. Remember what I told you about us and paper. Yeah, I think that's about it. So, what's the next? Margaret, you're supposed to do this part. Yeah, well, we have the key points now. So, Margaret's going to finish, and then we're going to turn the second presentation over to Parks.
Okay, so just to reiterate our key points, New York City Parks is conducting a cleanup action known as a removal action under a formal consent order from EPA of ballfields 5 through 8 and ballfield 9. The time frame is set by the consent order, including completion of ballfields 5 through 8 by fall 2018, completion of ballfield 9 by spring 2020. The design work is well underway, should be finished this fall. And we will keep you updated as we move through the process, where we like to be as transparent as we can be, and anytime you guys have questions, we're happy to address them. You could always just give us a call, send us an email, and we'll keep having these meetings, we'll keep issuing fact sheets. The work for all of the other fields is being managed by New York City Parks to the same set of standards. And EPA is not, we won't have a consent order for those fields. We'll just kind of be in a cooperative partnership for that. And Parks will continue updating everybody on those fields. So thank you so much for coming.
So, do you have any specific questions about the order before we move on to parks? Yes.
The height, how high?
That's not about the order, but I'll forgive you. Yes.
So how high is raising the grade?
The grade?
That's a design question for Parks. So they're gonna actually go through the design in a PowerPoint right after this. So. No, it's on there. Yeah.
Yes, you and me.
The consent order goes from all the way from design all the way to completion. Construction, how's that defined? Because part of it is remediation, and then the design phase or the actual design as to how it's the use it will be used. Can it be separated? I mean, can the remediation be one consent order and then the community input into the design phase?
No, the consent order is all inclusive. It takes everything from start to finish for ballfields 5 through 8 and ballfield 9. So it's got sections about the design work and all of the, basically all the questions that the design needs to answer when we're looking at it. We want to know exactly what's being built before it's built. The construction work is considered everything that happens at the site, physically on the site, from the time that the first contractors come in and the first time that we go in to do any work on the fields, through like taking all of the park features out and then putting all of the new features in. Does that answer your question?
Well, I've been attending these meetings since the beginning of the problem, and I don't recall there being an RFP for the actual design of the fields or how the fields were going to be renovated. And the renovation, remediation, I understand, but maybe Parks can talk to that too. But I don't recall there being an RFP out there or a call for community input into how the fields were going to be designed.
Well, I can answer that now before we go on. We absolutely had a community scoping session to discuss the designs of the field. Plus, we've taken input from every one of these meetings that we've had. So I remember you from some of the other meetings. If you remember, there was lots of discussion about using natural grass on the surface. And then what we heard from many people in the room today, I see people nodding their heads, was that the preference was synthetic turf. So we used that information and input to inform and instruct the design.
But I don't remember a specific RFP, because that's a pretty formal process.
Yeah, there was an RFP to procure the designers, and we worked with the community board and elected officials and others, and we also let everybody on the mailing list for this meeting know of the scoping meetings that were taking place. But what I'd suggest, we're to give a glimpse of where the design is right now. So I would suggest maybe you take a look at that, and then if you have concerns, please voice them here. I think you'll be impressed with what you see with that.
Two more questions? One, two?
Okay, my question is kind of like his. I didn't hear anything about RFPs for that, and also I would like to know about local jobs. There are people here who have the qualifications to do have-has and to be a teamster, because that's what you're going to need. You're going to need a lot of trucking. And I wanted to know, is there a Section 3 clause or a type of Section 3 clause on this money?
There are absolutely provisions and requirements for minority and women-owned business. There is no provision for sourcing from this community. But we should have a discussion about that afterwards when we answer questions, and we will make every effort to see that the contractors that work on this project are encouraged to do so.
Yeah, hi. Well, thank you. So is it fair to say that basically the design is going to be capping, right? And the core samples, the lowest core samples have the highest contamination, and you only, right? The core samples, the ones at 24-inch depth, have the higher contamination. So would it be fair to say that most of the heavy metals are leaching down and are getting deeper, or have gotten deeper since the contamination was first initiated? And how deep, did you ever do like a 36 or 48-inch cores to see if the level tapered off? What's the deeper cross section?
Yeah, so in the removal program, when we do a sampling event, we look at areas that are most likely for people to come in contact with and to be exposed to. So we kind of didn't have a reason to go below 2 feet just because of the usage of the fields as a park. So EPA didn't collect any samples below 2 feet. We don't have evidence to show that there's leaching going on of. Well, so lead and other heavy metals tend to bind very tightly to soil particles. So it's not likely that it would actually get carried by rainwater through the soil to percolate lower into the ground. Yeah, I mean, there could be some degree of that, but I mean, some of it could be that there's topsoil and maintenance done over the years. I mean, these fields have been baseball fields since 1940. So, I mean, there has been maintenance over the years, and mixing of soils on the surface, and
But basically, once the volume of soil got contaminated, it's not going to move, go down, basically go to the remaining state.
not to a significant extent.
So, and with that being said, can I just piggyback off of that? He's talking about the lead going down. My issue is I believe the lead is coming up. The groundwater table, where is the groundwater table in those ball fields? Like, what's the depth?
I don't have that information on hand.
Okay, so relatively.
I will tell you, we've also done additional geotechnical borings and subsurface investigation. And at least the groundwater that we've tested in testing for permeability has shown no elevated lead contaminants. So we're assuming, I mean, the recommendation from the test is that we're not seeing leaching.
My question is, I've lived over there by the field, and I have some old bottles that are probably worth money that were found in those fields, okay? So what I'm thinking is that those fields were remediated back when I was living over there. And when Sandy came in, the water actually surged in, and I believe it saturated the water, not just coming across the water, but coming up.
Okay.
So-
Well, I will also tell you that, I don't know the number where that elevation is. It's not right under the field, but the good news is we're also raising the field up, in some areas maybe almost 3 feet. So, that is going to reduce the possibility of that groundwater,
If you would, one question I'd like to show part of the design. Any other questions on EPA?
On the
A lot of
order?
questions about the design, but I think our presentation.
Do you have questions about the order?
I just have a quick question about when's the remediation happening on ballfield 9? When's it starting? It said it was ending in 2020, but when's it starting?
When is it start?
So 2018 to 2020, like a 2-year window of remediation?
Okay, I want to make sure we stick to the order because we still have to do Parks presentation, and I still want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions. So if it's not related to the order, okay, you have a question about the order?
Field 9 is part of the consent order, correct?
Correct.
Is there a reason why that field is still open and having people play on it?
Can we talk about that? The question was, if Field 9 is part of the order and is going to be cleaned up, why is it still open?
Okay, so I meant to touch on that actually. So the top foot of ballfield 9 doesn't have any contaminants that exceed our screening levels. So the top foot of ballfield 9 is basically okay for use. We don't see any harm in using that field as it is now. The higher levels of contamination are found deeper. So because the fields, through normal use of the fields, people shouldn't be able to access the higher levels of contamination that are deeper down. So that's why it's okay to stay open in the short term for the next 2 years until that construction can start.
And one other question?
Yeah, the $28.5 million that you mentioned in your presentation, is that just for remediation? Is that just the remediation portion? Is that what EPA is putting into the project?
No, that's what Parks, that's the cost that Parks has for ballfields 5 through 8 and ballfield 9 combined. So, and that's inclusive of the design and the construction and everything included in the order for those fields.
All right, then I'm going to turn the floor over to New York City Parks. I guess, Commissioner, you're going to be presenting? You're going to make sure to introduce all your folks?
Yes, it's good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, by the way. I see a lot of faces that I've seen at all of the community meetings, and we appreciate your participation. We have representation from a number of elected offices. We had Karen Boynton from Assemblyman Felix Ortiz's office, and Dale Wiley from Congressman Velasquez's office. I know we have representatives from Councilman Menchaca's office, representatives from Community Board 6, so we appreciate you all. Also from EPA, we have Andy Prashak and Chloe Metz and Natalie Loney, who you heard from, and certainly Margaret Greger. And we really appreciate this partnership. Margaret used the word partnership, and it's not often you'll find an entity from one government, municipal government, speaking fondly of an entity from a federal government, particularly a regulatory agency. But this partnership has been absolutely terrific, and we appreciate your help. I'm going to cut really quick to some of the questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Imelda Bernstein, who's been the architect working on 5, 6, 7, 8, as well as 9. And I think you'll see in the design she's about to share with you, she's addressed in this design a number of the concerns. So if we could just go to the next slide. Just for review, Mary, can we center this a little bit better? That's fine, that's great. So ball fields 5 through 8, as well as ball field 9, are the fields that are included in the consent order. The location of the old smelter plant was here, and I think Margaret Greger did a great job of talking about drift. That was the contaminant drift. that cause contamination on the fields. What we've done here is best described as what happens when you start peeling an onion. So we found spelter-related contaminants here, but we also found contaminants in other areas of the Red Hook facility that were not related to the smelter, but still a significant concern. The good news about it is this administration has made a $105 million commitment to remediate and clean up all of these fields in a phased way that takes into account the mandate of the consent order. So for review, these fields, even though the consent order has just been finalized, Parks has been working on the design for these, which Imelda will share with you, for almost a year now, maybe 6 or 9 months? How long have you been working on the design?
On this, we've been working on this as part of the consent order. The design started in fall.
Very good. So fall of last year. And then we will also remediate Ballfield 9. Now someone asked a question about how come that's phased. You got your answer. It's because there's clean soil. There's soil that's free of contamination on the top of 9. What makes this a little confusing is, although they're not smelter-related contaminants, when we did the testing, we found contaminants on soccer field 2. We will remediate these 2 fields at the same time, even though 2 isn't part of the consent order. And the reason for that is just scale. It does not make sense to remediate this section and not address that. They're in the same block, they're in the same grid. This comes out of construction, complete, ready to use by the public, fall of 18. As soon as that's done, this will go into construction. So this together is considered phase 2. Again, it has a part that's consent and a part that's being done, quite frankly, just because it's the right thing to do. Phase 3, which is going to start actually shortly afterwards, is soccer field 3 and ball fields 1 through 4. This entire area is currently closed. I'm going to speak in a second about what our short and long-term plans are. This will be the next phase. The final phase of this remediation, again, not part of the consent order, will be soccer field 6 and soccer field 1. There are subsurface contaminants, but like ball field 9, these, there's no chance for people to get in contact with those. For soccer field 1, we actually have synthetic turf there already. And synthetic turf works as a wonderful barrier to keep people away from any contaminants underneath. So that's the phasing. 4 different phases, a total of 105, rounded off $106 million. Final piece, this piece, will be done in 2022. I think, Imelda, let's hop straight to your presentation. Let's show folks what we've got planned for 5-8 for now, and then we'll take some questions. And perhaps you can, in your presentation, make sure you answer the question about elevations. You had a question about the elevation of the design? We'll make sure we get it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, my name is Imelda Bernstein. I'm a landscape architect and the project manager, the Parks project manager for ball fields 5 through 8. And we have contracted TRC engineers with Abel Baines and Butts as the consultant that will design this project. And the reason being is that we wanted to make sure that we had a team that had the expertise of doing environmental remediation as well as doing synthetic turf and designing it here in New York City, because we really want to make sure that we have a team that we can just, when we got the consultants, that could hit the ground running and make sure that we could meet the requirements of the consent order and make sure we go through all the different approvals, interagency approvals quickly and not delay the project. This is the schematic design for ball fields 5 through 8. This is the culmination of a process that Margaret outlined that started with the public scoping meeting, and then we brought on the consultants to start the design. And we went through internal approvals. We brought this to the community board for their approval. We received Public Design Commission approval, preliminary approval this past month. And now EPA is reviewing the interim design plan that we submitted. And it's a little difficult. It's 4 ball fields. It's a very large site. It's over 4 acres. So the schematic doesn't really reflect, I think, the complexities of the site. And so I'm going to walk you through, if you go to the next slide, what I think are the 4 aspects that we know that people have raised questions about, that have interest in. And so those 4 things are, we're upgrading the fields to synthetic turf. They're originally natural turf. And we're also bringing the field design up to current DPR standards. So the layouts, while they're similar, we have different standards now for the type of backstops, and the configuration of the dugouts. So that went into the design of the ball fields. We really looked at preserving the existing healthy shade trees that are on the site. The site has about 65, 70 trees on site. It's a lot of trees. And those are all outside of the actual ball fields. So there's a significant work that went into just looking at the planting strips and the sidewalks outside of the actual ball fields. And we looked into retaining the stormwater on site and just considering the implications for the groundwater and if the soils could do the percolation. And so we had to look at, and also synthetic turf doesn't really act the same as natural turf. And so we had to make sure that in the engineering of the drainage for this synthetic turf, that we would meet the requirements set forth by DEP in terms of putting stormwater into the sewer veins. And then we also looked at flood resiliency. This is a really big investment, the synthetic turf and remediating. And then in the future, because of the contamination, it's not just going to be a cut and dry reconstruction. So we have to look at making sure we protect this investment from flood events. And because, and you've heard that we're going to be raising the elevation of the site, so that means that we also have to maintain accessibility. We have to meet ADA standards, which adds, again, a little more complexity, more engineering to the site. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, so as I said, we are converting over to synthetic turf field. This provides more availability of the site to users. If it's heavily used, make sure we don't have to close it because of letting the grass recover. And then during the colder months, this field would be available for use. And so these are the furnishings that are DPR standards. And we also heard from the community board that we want to put additional seating and bike racks as amenities outside of the ball field. So we've added those things as well. Okay, now in talking about preserving our healthy, large shade trees. So as Margaret mentioned, we have to put a foot of clean cover over the site, either for what's called unpaved areas. So the synthetic turf is going to be the cover for the majority of the site. But we have a lot of trees on site, and so we worked very closely with our forestry division to come up with a plan and a strategy for preserving important trees, especially in Red Hook, because Red Hook has already lost a lot of the canopy because of Hurricane Sandy. But we have to balance thinking about the future in terms of having to go back and remove trees. We want to make sure that we try not to touch the site too much in the future, or try to minimize having to go back and touch the site. And also the clean cover requirements. There's no good way to do that without having a negative impact on healthy trees, because you either have to you can't put a foot of clean soil on the trees because it'll suffocate the tree roots. But if you remove the soil and replace it, that is very stressful for the tree roots as well, because you'll have to go in and so the remediation that we will do for the healthy trees requires actually hand excavating and vacuuming out all the soils around the roots, and we're trying to get as much soil as we can and keep those roots protected, and this has to be done in a very careful and a very quick manner in order to make sure we don't damage the trees. And we're also going to be putting this demarcation fabric to indicate where the contaminated soil is underneath, and that has to go around the tree roots as well. And so for the trees that we are going to preserve, and just about all of them are on the Lorraine Street side, if you're familiar with the site. It turns out a lot of the trees are not in good condition because of Hurricane Sandy, I think, and some of the existing site conditions. So for that, we're actually going to go in and do a full remediation for those planting strips, and we're going to put in new trees. And so in that way, we're going to do the full remediation, and hopefully these trees will provide good cover in the future, and they'll last for the length of their life. And for the existing trees, though, we can't do the full soil remediation, so we're going to put a 4-foot fence around those trees on Lorraine, on the planting strips. If you go to the next slide.
So you put in a fence around the trees on Lorraine Street?
On Lorraine Street that are in the planting strip. That also provides protection from the public so that they don't have exposure to the soil. So we're going to try to remove as much soil as we can, and we're going to plant and put mulch covering on it. But basically, for other projects that we've had where we've had to do this type of remediation, we put up a fence, and this is in consultation with the New York State DEC. For a situation like this, they want us to put a fence just to provide additional barrier to the public. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So there are about 5 or 6 trees on Lorraine Street that are street trees that are right by the street curb. And so we didn't want to put fencing around those trees because they're right next to where the cars park and where the bus comes through. And so putting up a 4-foot fence right up against the curb, we didn't think, would present more problems. So what we're going to do for those trees, we're actually going to raise the sidewalk. We're going to remove the existing sidewalk on Lorraine and raise the sidewalk so that we can actually put permeable pavers over those tree roots and put aggregate underneath it so that water can percolate down to the trees, but that for pedestrians that are walking and for people that are parking on the street, you won't have a fence. That just provides that barrier. So this is for about 5 or 6 trees on the street trees by the curb, but we feel that for the health of the trees, it's better to keep them in a planting strip where in the soil, the exposed soil, and then we'll put the fencing along that area. This is not going to happen. That 4-foot fence won't be around the entire site, because for the other sides of the field, we will go in and put in brand new trees, and we'll do the full remediation. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so In terms of stormwater retention, this is something we heard from the public scoping meeting, and we also understand too, the issues of flooding here. And the fact is that when we do synthetic turf fields, we have to meet DEP requirements in terms of how much water goes into the storm drains. And so typically we put in a detention system to help restrict all that water that comes off the field during a storm event. So the water is what we call detained, and so it'll go in more slowly. And we also take that opportunity with the detention system to allow some of that water to percolate on site. But we are actually going a step further than just using a detention system. We are going to have a perimeter bioswale, which is actually going to go all the way around the perimeter of the field. And how we're going to achieve that is that we're going to take that existing curb where the fence is, and then we're going to move in the perimeter 6 feet. And we're going to put up a new curb. And in that 6-foot area around the fields, we're going to use that for a bioswale, which is just a term for it's a planted area, and that's going to allow the storm water to remain on site. So this blue area here is the extent of the ball field that is actually going to then be diverted out to this bioswale, and that water will remain on site and will infiltrate in place. So this water will not go into the sewer main. For the stormwater to the detention system, we are going to take this water, put it into these large detention pipes, but the pipes will also be slotted. They will have openings, and so the water will have some percolation effect, but we have to make sure that so we don't overload those detention the pipes and have the water come back up through the field. So we have what we call an overflow system, so that if there is a large rain event and our detention system fills up, it will go into the sewer main. And so it's a complex system, but we want to make sure that we meet DEP's requirements, but we also have a fail-safe system so the water doesn't back up and go up through the synthetic turf. But I will say that almost between a third and a half of the site, we are retaining the storm water in these bioswales and allowing them to percolate into the soil. Okay. And this is a cross section where this shows that this is the sidewalk, okay, and then the planting strip where we're going to put in a new tree, the existing perimeter curb of the fields, and then this is the new curb that we're going to put for the new fence. And you'll see that this wall is higher, and I'm going to speak to that next. So this is the synthetic turf here, and then we are filling this up to the new elevation. But what we're going to have is we're going to have these weep holes or pipes that are going to allow the water to come out and drain into this 6-foot wide bioswale.
That's the 3-foot elevation above what it is?
I think this elevation is, I think, roughly that. I mean, it varies because it varies by the existing height and okay, go to the next one. Okay, so this is just an enlargement of the corner of Hicks and Lorraine. And what I wanted to show again in the plan was that what we've marked here is that, so at this entrance into this dugout, our designers have put the elevation of 8.45, and then the new elevation of the field is 11, which is the base flood elevation for this location. And that's for the 100-year storm. So you can see it'll vary because existing elevation varies, but we figured that the most that it's going to be is around 3 feet. Okay, the next slide. Okay, and so here's a section, an illustrative section that shows again how this works from the sidewalk, where you have these street trees and pavers. And this red line here is the actual existing elevation of the sidewalk, which runs right through here. So we're going to raise the sidewalk a little bit so we can put those pavers on the street trees, the sidewalk, and then this planted area with the 4-foot fence, and then ramps up to every dugout where they're needed for access. And then the bioswale that's going to be between the old curb and the new curb, and then the synthetic turf field. Okay, and this is the 3D rendering. It's the base flood elevation for the 100-year storm, so that's what we're designing to, where it's a not 11 feet. So the current, at least, it's about what the base flood elevation is. Okay, so FEMA has set the base flood elevation for areas in a flood zone. In this particular location, it's 11 feet above sea level. And I think that around the existing elevations for this field occur between 11 and a half and maybe down to 8, maybe a little less than 8 feet above sea level. So that's where the 3 foot. So it'll be from no change in elevation to about 3 feet. Yes?
How will you decide which field won't change?
I'm sorry?
How will it change 3 feet or just some of them?
No, as I said, because the existing elevations around the field are different. So, as I said, I think this side is actually above the base flood elevation, the existing elevation, and then the street goes down to these corners. So they go lower. They go 2 to 3 feet lower. So that's where that change is. But if you're looking at it, if you go back to the section, so what we're doing, we're actually just making a flat surface for the synthetic turf. So it's pretty much, I won't say all of it is 11, but the grading is going to be so minimal that it's going to be about mostly flat at 11. And so because the site slopes like this, and we're making it flat on top like that, that's where the change is. So over here, there's no change, and then the lower existing elevation, you'll see the wall. Okay.
One more thing, then we'll go to questions.
Sure.
Mary, if you could go to, I think it was slide 3, I wanted to speak about ballfields 1, 2, 3, 4. There were some questions that came up. Go to slide before, that would actually be easy for you to speak from that. So, many of you were here when, I guess we met in March to discuss these. We did testing of these fields, and we found exactly what I was discussing before. In the infield areas, there was no surface contamination. In the outfield areas, we did find bare spots where there was surface contamination. What we attempted to do here, and we did this in May and June, was to aggressively hydroseed. It's doing aggressive seeding. Many of you have probably seen it. If you've driven by a highway and it looks like they've painted the grass a light green, it's really grass seed that's held together with a mastic of fertilizer and small pellets that I guess are best described as being tapioca-like. They hold water and they dissipate water slowly so that the seed can germinate. So we did that here in the hopes that by this time this year, we could get a solid grass cover here that would serve as an effective barrier to keep people safe. We walked that field with our colleagues, Christy Andrew and Maureen Little, about 2 weeks ago, just to see how the grass had taken. And although it had grown in considerably, there was still some bare spots. So we have made the decision to keep these fields closed for the rest of the year. What we will do is we will hydroseed again in October, November, which is really the best time to plant grass. Grass is funny. It actually likes cool nights and warm days. That's when it grows the best. It can actually grow 3/4 of an inch in that environment. So we're going to keep them closed. We're going to aggressively hydroseed in October, November, with a real expectation that we'll be able to open for baseball in the spring and keep these fields open for next year. So that's where we are with those fields now. And I think we'll go to questions at this point. Yes. Not New York Rising, but we have shared our notes on design with the group working on resiliency. Do you want to talk about that?
The Red Hook integrated flood protection study. We've been in touch, or we have met with them and actually shared our project with them, and we are also aware of the recommendations that they are going to be putting forth in terms of the flood protection system. For this particular ball field, because of the aggressive timelines, and also, because of the aggressive timelines, we've moved forward because we need to remediate this, and that's why we're also voluntarily raising the fields up. What we've also discussed is that this field is not really sort of under consideration as part of in the areas of the flood protection, the proposed flood protection systems. So we will continue to work with them and share the information as we move forward into the areas that may figure into the flood protection system. Yes.
Just to piggyback off of her question, on the New York Rising Board, they actually gave us a 100-year storm scenario, and that 11 feet is still not matching up with the information that we have there.
So I have seen the presentation, I think, that they gave to Red Hook Rising, and so there's the base flood elevation, and they're looking to do what their design flood elevation is going to be higher for the flood protection system, for the actual, berm or wall or structure that's going to, be the flood protection.
I'm talking about the sea level rise,
Right.
and the actual surge.
Exactly. So I think, but if this were going to be part of that flood protection system, then that would be a concern because we're lower. But we're actually going to be behind, most likely going to be behind that flood protection system from what they're looking at, where those alignments for the flood protection system is. Well, go ahead.
So there still hasn't been a total decision on what the flood protection mechanism may be. If in fact the flood protection mechanism is a wall, let's say 2 feet above the base flood elevation, so that would make it 13 feet, that would protect the space. The other thing, all these conversations that are going on about resiliency and protection are based on protecting residential facilities. This design, even if it floods, will drain as soon as the flooding subsides. So it will not get damaged. So it's not the same sort of consideration that we would make on a resident. No furnaces, there's no mechanicals, there's no utilities that will get damaged. If it floods, it will drain. And at best, all that we would lose from the saltwater inundation is the plant material that's in the monsters.
That's a great answer. I have one more question.
One more and then we're into the general. He's getting jealous. Yes, sir.
Two questions, I guess. Is the funding secure for the entire and second, are there any serious efforts to shorten the time frame so
good answer and a bad answer. Funding is absolutely secure. It's already in the parks budget to do this. These projects take time, and one of the reasons we wanted Melda to come out today and just share with you the complexity of design. We don't see any way to accelerate this time frame. If there's a way we can, we will find it and do that. There are some things that can happen. You can have perfect alignment with procurement. That is, when you go to get the contractor, it becomes very clear which contractor you want to use. That can save time. There are a number of things that can happen, but we're not prepared to commit to that at this point because it's really not something that's under our control.
Ready? Okay, so first I'd just like to stress that I live in this area and I really don't see a lot of the residents from the projects or the back here. Can I just get a hand to see who actually lives here? No, in this area. It's like,
Well, it's interesting, this has been our concern too, since we've been meeting. We're going to take your contact information,
yeah.
and we're going to need you to help us get more people out. Because we have flyers, we have tried many different areas.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone and talked to people at the offices for both sides of the redhook houses, and we try to like get the word out that way. We leave stacks of fact sheets for every meeting. So, you know, if there's anything else we can do to get more people here from the area, please tell us. We would love that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it requires some dollars because it's about equity. We have young people who run their own businesses, they do marketing in the area, and they would love to help you guys, you know what I'm saying? But it's about equity. Nobody's doing anything for free, you know, we have to live and eat and pay bills.
We would speak to you when we welcome you. We need that to drive this design. And certainly for the designs of the other fields. So question?
Yes, from a community's perspective, an industrialist's perspective, I'm thinking about huge volumes of material, the soil that's going to go out of the area and come into the area, and whether or not there was any study or thought process into these trucks coming in and out of the neighborhood, and alternatively, if the use of water was considered to bring those bulk volumes in and out. Mainly, we're an industrial terminal that's just south of the ballfields, the Lawrence Bay Terminal, that could handle all of this material via water and eliminate any impact on the community, and possibly safety issues as well.
Two sides of that. With the approach that we're using here, there's very little material that's going out.
It's what?
There's very little material that's going out. It's one of the many advantages to capping. You don't disturb the material, you don't expose the community to that material, and you also don't expose the community to the traffic inherent with removing that material. So the majority of what's going to happen with trucking is material coming in. And we absolutely will do a circulation assessment for how the construction works in a way that has a minimal amount of impact on the community.
That's part of the traffic control plan too. Like the traffic control plan should encompass all transportation of materials to and from the site. So we'll be looking at that.
And my colleague from EPA keeps reminding me to mention one of the things that we're going to do, even though we have these fields closed, we're going to work to make sure that all the youth groups that have time currently on any of those fields, even the ones that are closed, find field time somewhere else. So Eddie Vargas is here, and I spoke. He's very confident. They're all smiling. All the permit holders know Eddie well. We will make every effort, and we're very confident that we can find alternative play spaces for all the youth permit holders of these fields. Yes?
Is it going to be synthetic grass or is it going to be turf with pellets? What's the study regarding pellets?
It's a great question. It's going to be turf with pellets, but we've moved off of the crumb rubber infill.
What's that?
We moved away from using crumb rubber infill. Those are the rubberized pellets. It's not that they're dangerous, they're not, but it's that they get hot. And there are a couple of different products that we're using now, and Imelda, correct me if I'm wrong, what we're likely to use in this product is a silica-coated sand. It's not toxic at all, and it serves the same purpose. The pellets that we put in the synthetic turf help the fibers stay up. If you don't have pellets in between them, the fibers tend to lay down flat. So are we using silica coated sand?
That's correct. That is the DER standard now.
The other big advantage to that is it's a much lighter color, so it doesn't absorb the heat as much as the black crumb rubber infill. So you will not see black crumb rubber infill, and you gentlemen will be happy your players won't have that in their shoes.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too, that one of the requirements we have for any fill or any material that's used in the capping has to meet the DEC requirements. So if there's something we have a question about, like the pellets within the turf, we'll have a sample to make sure that it's non-toxic.
Yes.
For ball fields 1 through 4, and soccer fields that are in the middle of that space.
4 or 5 minutes.
If the hydro seed, let's say it's unsuccessful in the fall, and then you realize that, what is the timeline for that phase if that is not completed the way that you anticipate?
We thoroughly expect that the hydro seed will work. When we were out there, it was remarkable. There was only about 10%, maybe a little less than 10%. That was bare grass. We give this a full season, over a fall growing season and an early spring growing season. We're very confident that we'll be able to open this.
And just to piggyback on that, thank you for that answer, and just the maintenance of the grass in that field, is there going to be an upping in the maintenance of the grass part? Because I know always like playing on dirt was pretty much all right, and like playable relatively well. The grass was turned over a lot because they wouldn't play like football or rugby or other sports on that grass.
We will do additional maintenance, but we need to be perfectly honest with one another. Playing football on natural grass, unless you have a very controlled environment with very limited use, never works. That's why we're going to go ultimately to synthetic turf. So we will monitor this, and particularly in the fall season of next year, if we start to see a compromise in the grass cover in the outfield, we will have to shut. Okay. We have to put public safety first.
Thank you.
You keep referring to ballfields 5 through 8 as ballfields. They used to be softball fields. They weren't just ball fields.
They are softball fields. They'll continue to be softball fields. And there is a rectangular soccer field that's nestled in the middle. Good catch.
The 6 feet in, the 4 angles, has anybody thought about adult softball? I don't play anymore, I'm retired, but if you move it in 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, it's going to be a little crazy playing adult softball.
There is a slight reduction. There's no way for us to get around it. Because the design has to, as Imelda mentioned, because we're raising it up to the elevation, we have to get random in there as well. And there needs to be an adequate system for water protection, both for resiliency effort and community protection.
I have a question and a suggestion. So the question is there anything going to be done on the track, like the track itself?
On the track of 3?
Yeah, the actual track.
Yeah, we have money to remediate the whole thing, the entire thing.
It's going to stay open?
No, the track will stay open until there's construction, but then it will close. It'll absolutely close for construction.
And then my suggestion or thought, have you given any thought to, in the meantime, since ball field 9 is still kind of playable, possibly building a smaller, middle school soccer field in the outfield to kind of take some of the pressure off fields 4 and 5 and 7.
I always like to think about suggestions, but the thought of putting soccer on the one field that we have that's still usable for baseball and softball, when we still have 2 soccer fields available on the site, is of a little bit of concern, but we will consider it. It was a good question.
Is there any way to make soccer field 6 better in the meantime? Because it's not really a soccer field, and now there's not even goals on it anymore. So it's just an open space of grass.
I think we can take a look at it. I would not want to hydroseed it. If we were going to hydroseed it, we would end up doing it right in the middle of your soccer season. It's October, November.
When will the track be closed in addition to the soccer field in the middle? When are you going to be including the track also?
When are we likely to be in construction on 3? So mid-18,
What will happen to the actual track?
19.
What will be happening to the actual track?
Hmm?
What are you going to be doing to the actual track?
We're gonna tear it up and redo.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it doesn't make sense to do that level of capital investment here and leave you with the same track. You'll end up with a brand new track. If your question is whether you'd be able to use the track during construction, there's absolutely no way. There would be too much construction activity in this entire area.
While there's construction in the soccer field, there wouldn't be on a track again.
It's a good idea, but it doesn't lend itself well to a phasing approach. It would take much more time overall and lots more money. We'll think about it, but I don't see it. Yes.
I know it was talked about at one of the meetings earlier in terms of putting lighting in, but I don't remember what the answer was.
Yeah, well, we're actually working on the lighting here. We're not totally certain we can get it in, but it is a goal. It's absolutely.
So just two questions. One of them, you mentioned that you will be bringing in the barriers of 4, 5, and 6 in by 6 feet. Is it just going to be for 5 through 8? Is it just going to be for that square that you will be adding the biosphere to at the sites?
Well, we're going to be, as we go through the design for each of these fields, we have to take all things into consideration. So specifically for the design of 5 through 8, we felt that was, what we wanted to do.
And you said it's 6 feet. It's bringing the outline in 6 feet.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
You had some
This is any part of
You have some questions on the lawn areas when you're doing, like, around the soccer field and other places. Would that include the lawn areas being rehabilitated? You're talking right now about the athletic components, but around the fields, like the soccer field.
Yes,
there's a lot of lawn areas.
Yes, that will be removed. Yes.
And are you going to be putting turf there also?
No, we're still that way.
So that'll be natural grass that goes in between areas like
Yes,
where the picnic tables are over there.
Yes. And we would take, and I don't want to, we're not in design yet, so let me say that would be a design goal. But we would use that same approach in these passive areas around one. And just remind me, I introduced the EPA staff, and I didn't introduce the park staff. So we have Randy Stewart, who's going to be the project manager on 1, soccer 3, and 1 through 4. Emmanuel Thingay is the lead designer from Borough Brooklyn.
Yes, several of us.
One of them. He's being very modest in parks. If you're in the parks, it sounds like I know a lot of stuff from the any other questions? Yes.
One issue, Hallett Street continues between Clinton Street and Court Street. Right now, from what I understand, it was filled up with dirt that a contractor left a decade or so ago of contaminated fill, and it was never removed. Can that be looked at to be incorporated in this overall fix of the parks?
In the street bed itself?
Yeah, it's a physical street with curbs and tree pits and so forth on the sidewalks that runs between Court Street and Clinton Street.
It's
covered with what I was told was contaminated soil, which is the reason why it was never removed. Some contractor did some construction work some decades ago, was allowed to use the street, left it there, and the city's been burdened with it since.
It's a fair question, and it's one that I don't have an answer for right now. It is not included in the scope of work or the funding that we've mentioned here, but I will raise the question. It's a fair question.
Will there be a consent order required for the remediation of the other fields? Will EPA be involved in those fields, or is that something that Parks is undertaking themselves?
So the consent order is for the fields that were impacted by the Columbia Smelting and Refining Works facility. So that only includes ball fields 5 through 8. So we will not be doing a consent order for any of the other fields in the park.
But it's become pretty terrific relationship. We've been sharing with EPA our design intent and plans for all those areas that don't fall within the jurisdiction of their consent.
Right, but the consent orders are pretty restricted.
The consent order is limited to 5, 6, 7, 8, and Ballfield 9. Yes.
So when you're doing the cleanup for, let's say for all of phase 3, is during phase 3, is that whole area going to have fence around it and you can't go in or out of there at all?
Likely, I really don't want to speculate too much on it because we haven't gotten anywhere near the actual design phase. If you make sure your names are on the sign-in sheet, we'll make sure that you're invited to the scoping meeting where those details get discussed.
But you probably wouldn't know that for a long time, right?
A year and a half, 2 years. But again, it becomes much more expensive to do projects in the phased way. And then it takes more time. So the real trade-offs. Do you want to open one area and end up with a 2 or 3 year extension? Or do you want to, when I say get the band-aid off, do you want to? Yes, sir.
Dan from Congressman Velasquez's office. I just want to make the point that many in this room may not be aware of the presentation of the Integrated Flood Protection System study, which the Red Hook Committee 2 weeks ago got the preview of it, and they're going to be going around and getting feedback from different constituent groups in the neighborhood about it. But basically, I can tell you that that phase 2 and 3 areas south of Bay Street is pretty much that zone where they're looking at where would we elevate some berm or some structure that would protect us from a surge, flood coming from the bay. So I suggest that Parks and DEP rep is here? Yeah. DEP? Okay, so we have Mr. Bruno from DEP. I think it would be good for some reps to be at those conversations so that that conversation can be informed by your long-term planning. Because that thing probably is going to run through your heart.
The flood facilities is really under ORR rather than us.
Yeah.
We handle stormwater flooding, and of course, with that said, if there's any areas that are problematic in terms of stormwater flooding, we'll be happy to look at it.
And one of the reasons I raise that is because Congressman Velasquez also covers the Lower East Side. And she's actually there tonight on another section of the employment meeting at Smith Houses. But we know that the Big U, or parts of the East Coast Resiliency Plan, also has protection for a Lower East Side. But when you build something that keeps water out, it also keeps water in that wants to drain out, as you know, because Parks is looking at, I don't know if it's public yet, those retention tanks to deal with storm overflow.
Very careful, we're not looking at retention tanks here.
Well, I know, so I'm not saying you're not, but I'm just saying what I'm saying is,
you may want to be more clear than you say.
what I'm saying is that's what's happening in Long Manhattan. But I still think that DEP, because whenever you build a barrier, you're dealing with drainage issues. I think ORR, yes, but I think DEP too, just because this community is very concerned about drainage.
So the bottom line is we will absolutely maintain a dialogue with this effort. But I also want to be very clear and honest. We have funding for this project, and we have ball fields that this community needs now, and we have funding. So we will certainly maintain a dialogue and see where those projects can overlap. But I think we want to be careful that we don't do anything that unnecessarily delays getting these fields back on target for a community that really needs them. Because we have a crisis in Red Hook right now. It's an opioid obesity crisis. That is for sure affecting our children. I think we have to focus that as we consider the impacts of 100-year service.
Excuse me.
Please.
I don't agree because so many feasibility studies, so many different groups, and so many pots of money. we don't want to waste money. You know what I'm saying? So we don't want you doing something, even if it's a baseball field, that's going to be compromised in the next year or two, or at the same time, because your timetables are close. But it looks like you'll be closing up and they'll be breaking ground, and that's an issue.
No, actually no. And I'm sorry if I said that the wrong way or you misinterpreted. There's actually a real opportunity here because we will be in design as they're getting closer to plans. So this is going to dovetail nicely. And we absolutely will coordinate where we can.
Okay, I'll make sure you get those documents because they're in the library too, right next to your documents.
Thank you.
In the library. Yeah.
We have
I just want to make one short part. We did meet with the flood protection study folks earlier this summer. And actually one of the, they have different alignments, but a couple of them do go through here, and precisely because these fields are actually at a high elevation. And so we're very close to at least, because they haven't actually set that design flood elevation, but the reason why they're putting the alignment through here is because the field is actually, these are already existing at a high enough elevation. So we understand that, and we have been talking, as I said, we know that this, this is an area of interest.
Right?
Yeah, so, and for them, because we're close, so, we won't have to do 3 feet the way that we're doing here, because this is actually lower than this area of Red Hook.
So the cameraman is yours. Any other questions?
Sorry, you may have addressed this earlier, but just when you talk about, it's maybe what we need, but when you talk about how the contamination in fields other than 5289 is not with the smelting facility, does that mean that it's completely unrelated to the contaminants from the smelting facility, or it's sort of traveling over and it just because it wasn't located right there?
So we think the contamination in the other fields is actually from historic fill, because this whole part of Red Hook used to be part of the Gowanus Bay. It was pretty much all underwater. We know at least from here down. So we think the whole site was made of the whole area was made of historic fill, and the smelter came in after the land had already been built out, and then it deposited its contaminants. So we didn't find evidence of smelter-related materials in any other fields except for ball fields 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
To plug the community involvement plan again, it does have a figure in this document that actually shows a map pre-1900 that shows the marshy areas in Red Hook. It's on page 7. So it shows the smelter footprint, and where the smelter was located was actually part of that marshy area. And so, as Margaret was saying, much of what we're on now is fill. So that fill is where we're seeing non-smelter related.
Yeah, but in the Superfund program, we can go after identifiable industrial sources. We can't go after historic fill, so that's why the distinction is made.
Are there any further questions? I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Again, if you have not done so, please put your name on the sign-in sheet, take a copy of the fact sheet, and we will be meeting with you all again